is Johnny Depp's baby shoe. No flat surfaces to speak of. And I remember that she told me it took inches overall height, 9.5 inches. Story too, which I will share, which is kind of comical, but they were not to be taken out of country. Translucent, lucite, I believe, acrylic, very similar yet slightly different. Well, we're going to start off with this stone, by the way, Jonah, and to whomever. This stone was a gift from the office of the Prime Minister of Japan to a nuclear physicist named Edward Murray Smith, who was a neighbor of mine in Spanish Wells Plantation here on Hilton Head many years ago. He worked for the government. He and his wife were both paid $1 million at the time as nuclear physicist, which I have all the credentials, which I will show in a few minutes. Because he spoke at a symposium with 300 other Asian nuclear physicists, the office of the Prime Minister, whether it was the Prime Minister himself or not, or his assistant that gave him this stone, I forget. I thought I originally said the President of Japan, but they're not presidents, they're Prime Minister. I've been a little shaky on a few of the details, but the story is very real. This stone, for 10,000 years, water poured through this stone, creating this hole. And this is a very important gift, and he made it known to Edward Murray Smith that he was not to let it out of his possession if he didn't mind until he got it to its destination, which was Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. This little scratch here, whether that was on it or not, I don't know, or whether it was dropped and created, that I don't know, honestly. It weighs about 24 pounds, by the way. But the story is 10,000 years of water creating this natural hole, which can also be referred to as a hagstone, which I found out sometime later. Like I say, this is part of the gift. Other than the story behind it, I don't have anything in writing stating that, but I've got a lot of other credentials, which we'll see in a few minutes, regarding the authenticity of the stone. Just a stone that water for 10,000 years went through the stone. I call it a hagstone, which is what somebody said that it was. Okay, now let's look at this stuff here. This is documentation, which I finally had translated by a Japanese speaking lady here in Sea Pines. This is the gentleman I'm talking about, who was the recipient of the gift of the stone. This is very, very real. If in fact he's still alive now, I do not know. We knew him because my mother and I sold his house back in what year I'm not sure, in Spanish Wells Plantation. And he had gone into the real estate effort, and he and his wife were not successful in that. And they were very pleased with us. Thusly, he gave me the stone, and my mother in reality, because I had recently built Japanese gardens in our residence down the street from where Edward Murray Smith and Nancy lived. And he said how perfect, and he knew that I appreciated it, which I really didn't know what it was at the time, but of course I did appreciate it and find it very, very important piece. It was a nice gesture. There's more to the story too, which I will share, which is kind of comical. But here are documents that were translated. Here's the original documents in Japanese. This is one, and then this is another one here. Of course, I have copies of these. These are copies. I have the originals right here someplace. It's actually in a tube. The actual real originals. These are copies here. Mm-hmm. Now this is a translation from these. And that kind of identifies the situation. Let's see what this is here. Now, these are just duplicates, I think, of these, right? The important things here are these people here, because I remember Edward was telling me that these people were very, very influential, vastly important people in the nuclear medicine world, of which all of this is about. And you got this, right? Mm-hmm. So that basically kind of is the documentation, not stating the story about the stone, but the stone is very real. Part of the story too, and I have to share without behaving too badly, part of the reason he gave me the stone, quite honestly, is when he was given the stone, as I mentioned a little bit before, he said, do not let this out of your possession while you're headed back from wherever it was in Japan to Hilton Head Island, Savannah probably, which was quite a lengthy trip, I'm sure, but nonetheless, so Edward took it very seriously and clutched the stone about him and actually carried it through the airports. He didn't carry it with him on his lap necessarily while I was on the plane, that I don't know, but he said, please don't leave it. So he said he walked it through airport after airport, and the thing weighs 24 pounds. And this is part of the story, you can edit it out, of course, if you want to. He said, I will tell you, and Betty, my mother, he said, I swore to God that I would never carry that stone another inch other than to give it to you, Dan, because, and his wife told me he never used that word, by the way. I can say this is 30 years ago or whatever. And he said, but that stone screwed up my neck. His language was vile, as mine can be. And he said he had neurological problems because of that stone. Airport after airport. And he said, and he had gone to different neurological doctors and so forth on Hilton Head and elsewhere. I don't know if he went to the Mayo Clinic or what, he could have afforded to. But anyhow, he said he never got right because of that effing stone. Part of the provenance, I guess. In which I laughed hysterically. He said I probably shouldn't give it away because I feel that, you know, Japanese God may strike me down or something. He was a very comical fellow, I will tell you. But he wasn't kidding when he was talking about his hate for the stone because of the neck problem. He said he'll never walk the same again, and he probably didn't. That I don't know. But anyhow, that's part of the story. That's the reality part of it. And to etch that in stone, no pun intended, how could you do it? But you don't make this stuff up. And I wouldn't have carried it around for 20 years either because it is heavy. But that's basically all I got on that I can think of. It's a legitimate conversation and as I know it. So to me it's a very funky stone. And I've had actually gemologists look at it and somebody says, first of all, you go ahead and believe the 10,000 years of water because of the fact that otherwise you can't create a hole in the stone like that no matter what you do, not with drills or anything. That's from, maybe it's not exactly 10,000 years, but that's the story. And I believe it. I prefer to believe it because why in the world would Edward Murray Smith lie about such a thing with such a comical demeanor about him when he was telling me the story? So there you go.